When 6-year-old Emma Richards walked into the Waffle House off Interstate 85 in South Carolina at 2:30 on a Wednesday afternoon, holding the hand of a woman who smiled too brightly and spoke too quickly, nobody paid much attention except for Tessa Cole, a server who'd worked the lunch shift for 11 years and had learned to notice things that didn't quite fit. The way the little girl's eyes swept the room with desperate calculation, the way her free hand clutched a purple stuffed rabbit so tightly her knuckles had gone white, the way she flinched when the woman touched her shoulder. These were the kinds of details most people missed in the everyday blur of a roadside diner. But Tessa had spent over a decade watching people pass through, tired families on long drives, truckers grabbing coffee, salespeople killing time between appointments, and she'd developed an instinct for recognizing when something felt wrong. What caught her attention first wasn't the child's fear, though that was there, visible in the rigid set of her small shoulders and the way she kept her gaze fixed on the floor. It was the contrast. The woman was polished, wearing expensive sunglasses pushed up on her head, designer jeans, a silk blouse that looked out of place in a Waffle House, and she carried herself with the kind of confidence that came from always getting her way. The child, by comparison, looked like she'd been dressed in whatever was available. Her pink t-shirt was wrinkled and slightly too large. Her denim shorts were faded and fraying at the hem, her sneakers were scuffed and worn, and her hair had been cut short, unevenly, like someone had done it in a hurry without much care. But it was the girl's face that made Tessa pause mid-pour while refilling a trucker's coffee 3 booths down. Something about those features, the wide brown eyes, the small upturned nose, the dusting of freckles across pale cheeks, felt familiar in a way Tessa couldn't immediately place. The woman slid into a corner booth near the back exit, pulling the child down beside her on the inside seat, effectively trapping her against the wall. The girl set her purple rabbit on the table and stared at it like it was the only safe thing in her world. The woman picked up a menu, her movements relaxed and casual, and when Tessa approached with her order pad, the woman smiled warmly and ordered 2 chocolate chip pancakes and a juice box for the child, a coffee for herself, and asked if they had fresh fruit. Her voice was smooth, pleasant, the kind of voice that belonged to someone used to being helpful and likable. The little girl said nothing, just kept her eyes on the rabbit, her small fingers tracing the worn fabric of its ears. Tessa wrote down the order and smiled at the child, trying to make eye contact, but the girl's gaze never lifted. That wasn't unusual. Plenty of kids were shy around strangers, but combined with everything else, the mismatched clothing, the uneven haircut, the woman's overly bright demeanor, it added to the growing unease Tessa couldn't shake. She walked back to the kitchen, put in the order, and stood by the coffee station, watching the booth from across the diner. The woman was on her phone now, typing rapidly, her expression focused and intent. The child sat perfectly still, not fidgeting, not playing, not asking for crayons or looking around with curiosity the way most 6-year-olds would. She just sat there, silent and contained, like she'd been trained to be invisible. Tessa's co-worker, Miguel, came up beside her, noticing her distraction. "You okay?" he asked quietly, following her gaze toward the booth. Tessa shook her head slowly, still watching. "Something's not right with that table. The woman and the little girl. They don't fit together." Miguel glanced over, his expression neutral. "Could be a lot of things. Stepmom, babysitter, aunt. You know how it is." Tessa nodded, but the unease wouldn't settle. She'd seen plenty of mismatched pairs over the years, tired parents with cranky kids, relatives who didn't quite gel, couples in the middle of custody handoffs. And this felt different. It felt deliberate, like the woman was performing normalcy while the child was barely holding herself together. The food came up a few minutes later, and Tessa carried it to the booth, setting the pancakes in front of the girl and the coffee in front of the woman. The woman thanked her pleasantly, asked for extra syrup, and told the child to eat up because they had a long drive ahead. The girl picked up her fork with mechanical precision, cut a small piece of pancake, and brought it to her mouth. She chewed slowly, her expression blank, and Tessa noticed she never once looked at the woman beside her. Tessa walked back to the counter and pulled out her phone, trying to ignore the nagging feeling in her gut. She opened her news app, scrolling through headlines without really reading them, and then she saw it. Amber Alert issued for 6-year-old Emma Richards, abducted from elementary school in Charlotte, North Carolina. Last seen wearing a pink dress and white sandals. Suspect believed to be driving a silver Honda Accord. The photo that accompanied the alert showed a little girl with shoulder-length brown hair, wide brown eyes, freckles, and a gap-toothed smile. Tessa's stomach dropped. She looked up, her gaze locking on the booth where the child sat, and her hands started shaking. The hair was different, cut short and choppy, and the clothes didn't match the description, but the face was the same. The eyes, the nose, the freckles, the small scar just above her left eyebrow that was visible in the Amber Alert photo and visible now across the diner. That was Emma Richards. Tessa's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She forced herself to stay calm, to move normally, to not draw attention. She walked into the kitchen, her hands trembling, and found Miguel restocking supplies near the dishwasher. "I need you to call 911, she said quietly, her voice barely steady. "Tell them there's a child matching an Amber Alert description at this location. Tell them to send units immediately but to come in quietly. No sirens, because the suspect is inside and will run if she gets spooked." Miguel's eyes went wide, but he didn't hesitate. He pulled out his phone and stepped into the manager's office to make the call, while Tessa forced herself to walk back out to the dining area, to act like everything was normal, to keep the woman from realizing she'd been noticed. Tessa refilled coffee at other tables, cleared plates, smiled at customers, and all the while kept the corner booth in her peripheral vision. The woman was still on her phone, scrolling through something with focused attention. The child had eaten maybe 3 bites of pancake and now sat motionless again, staring at her rabbit. Tessa approached the booth with a coffee pot, her hands steady through sheer force of will. "More coffee?" she asked the woman, her voice light and friendly. The woman looked up and smiled. "No, thank you. We're actually going to need the check soon. We have a schedule to keep." Tessa nodded, mentally calculating how long it would take for police to arrive. The local station was maybe 5 minutes away if they moved fast. She needed to stall. "I'll get that for you in just a minute," Tessa said. "Can I get the little one anything else? Some more juice, maybe?" The woman's smile tightened slightly, just a flicker of annoyance before the pleasant mask returned. "She's fine. Just the check, please." Tessa walked back to the register, printed the check with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, and carried it back to the booth. She set it down on the table, and as she did, she made deliberate eye contact with the child for the first time. Emma's eyes lifted, meeting Tessa's, and in that moment, Tessa saw everything: fear, desperation, exhaustion, and something else, a fragile, trembling hope that someone might finally see her. Tessa held that gaze for 3 seconds, then looked away, her heart breaking. She walked back to the counter, her mind racing. Miguel emerged from the office and gave her a small nod. "They're 2 minutes out. Coming in plain clothes, unmarked car. They said to keep her inside if possible." Tessa nodded and positioned herself near the front door, wiping down menus and organizing condiments, anything to look busy while blocking the most obvious exit. The woman in the booth pulled out cash and set it on top of the check, then started to gather her purse. "Come on, sweetie," she said to Emma, her voice sugary and false. "Time to go." Emma picked up her purple rabbit, clutching it to her chest, and slid out of the booth. The woman took her hand, her grip firm and possessive, and started walking toward the front door. Tessa's pulse spiked. The police weren't here yet. If the woman walked out, if she got to her car and drove away, Emma would disappear, maybe forever. Tessa made a split-second decision that could either save a child's life or make her look like a paranoid fool. She stepped directly into the woman's path, blocking the door, and smiled apologetically. "I'm so sorry, ma'am, but I think you gave me a 20 and the check was only $12.50. Let me get your change for you real quick." The woman's expression shifted, confusion giving way to irritation. "I left exact change." "I'm sure of it." Tessa shook her head, her voice friendly but firm. "I could have sworn it was a 20. Let me just double-check the register. This'll only take a second." The woman's eyes narrowed, calculation flickering behind the polite facade. She glanced toward the door, then back at Tessa, her grip on Emma's hand tightening. The child made a small sound, almost a whimper, and the woman's smile turned cold. "We're in a hurry. Keep the change." She tried to step around Tessa, but Tessa shifted, still blocking the door, her heart hammering. "Please, just one moment. I don't want to shortchange you. It's policy." The woman's mask cracked, Her voice turned sharp, authoritative. "Get out of my way, now." And that's when the door opened behind Tessa, and two plainclothes officers stepped inside, their badges visible on their belts, their expressions calm but ready. The woman's face went white. She looked at the officers, then at Tessa, and understanding dawned in her eyes, followed by panic. She released Emma's hand and bolted toward the back exit, moving fast, but one of the officers was faster. He intercepted her before she reached the door, his voice firm and professional. "Ma'am, stop right there. We need to speak with you." The woman spun, her voice rising, indignant and desperate. "This is harassment. I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just trying to take my daughter home." The second officer knelt down beside Emma, his voice gentle. "Hey there, sweetheart. What's your name?" Emma looked up at him, her eyes wide and terrified, and in a voice so small Tessa could barely hear it across the diner, she whispered her name. "Emma Richards." The officer's expression tightened. He reached for his radio, his voice low and controlled. "We have a positive ID on the Amber Alert subject. Child is safe, suspect in custody." The woman started screaming then, insisting she was Emma's legal guardian, demanding they call her lawyer, threatening lawsuits. But the officers were already moving, one escorting the woman outside in handcuffs, while the other stayed with Emma, speaking to her softly, asking if she was hurt, telling her she was safe now. Tessa stood by the door, her legs shaking so badly she had to lean against the counter for support. Miguel came up beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "You just saved that kid's life." Tessa couldn't speak. She just watched Emma, this tiny girl in mismatched clothes, clutching a purple rabbit, and felt something crack open in her chest. Within 20 minutes, the Waffle House parking lot had transformed into a command center. 3 more police cruisers arrived, along with an unmarked sedan carrying a detective from the Charlotte Police Department who'd been coordinating the search for Emma since she disappeared from her elementary school playground 4 days earlier. Detective Sarah Womack was a woman in her early 50s, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the kind of face that had seen too many cases like this one. She walked into the diner and went straight to Emma, who was sitting in a booth with a victim advocate, still clutching her purple rabbit, her eyes red from crying, but her small body rigid with the kind of tension that came from days of terror. Detective Womack knelt down beside the booth, her voice soft and careful. "Emma, my name is Sarah. I've been looking for you since the day you went missing. Your mom and dad have been looking for you too. They're on their way here right now. You're safe, sweetheart. Nobody's going to hurt you anymore." Emma's face crumpled, and she started to cry in earnest, the kind of crying that came from a place so deep it seemed to shake her entire small frame. The victim advocate put an arm around her shoulders and held her while she sobbed, and Detective Womack stood, her jaw tight with controlled anger at what this child had been through. She turned to Tessa, who was standing near the counter with Miguel, both of them watching the scene unfold with expressions of relief and residual shock. "You're Tessa Cole, the server who recognized her?" Tessa nodded, her voice still shaky. "I saw the Amber Alert on my phone maybe 20 minutes before I called. The hair was different, and the clothes didn't match, but the face was the same. The scar above her eyebrow, that's what confirmed it for me." Detective Womack extended her hand, and Tessa shook it. "Ms. Cole, what you did today saved this child's life. The woman we arrested is Diane Keswick, a former teaching assistant at Emma's school who was fired 3 months ago for inappropriate conduct. She's been planning this abduction for weeks, and she was transporting Emma to a location in Florida where we believe she intended to disappear with her permanently." Tessa felt sick. 4 days. This little girl had been with her abductor for 4 days. "How did you know to block the door?" Detective Womack asked. "That was quick thinking. If she'd gotten outside, if she'd made it to her vehicle, we might not have caught her in time." Tessa looked over at Emma, who was wiping her face with her sleeve, the victim advocate speaking to her in low, comforting tones. "I didn't think about it," Tessa said quietly. "I just knew if she walked out that door, Emma would be gone, and I couldn't let that happen." The detective nodded, her expression grave. That instinct, that willingness to act even when you weren't certain, that's what made the difference. Most people see something that feels wrong and they talk themselves out of it. They don't want to cause a scene, don't want to be wrong, don't want to get involved. You didn't hesitate, and that matters more than you know. Over the next hour, more officials arrived. A child psychologist who specialized in abduction cases came to assess Emma's immediate needs. A social worker coordinated with Emma's parents, who were driving down from Charlotte and were still 90 minutes away. And the FBI agent who'd been consulting on the case arrived to interview both Tessa and the officers who'd made the arrest. Tessa gave her statement 3 times, to local police, to the detective, and finally to the FBI agent, a man named Torres, who had kind eyes and a methodical way of asking questions that made her feel like every detail mattered. He asked about the moment she'd recognized Emma, about the woman's behavior, about the decision to block the door, and he took notes on everything with focused attention. "When you saw the Amber Alert," Agent Torres said, "what made you look up and connect it to the child in your restaurant?" The hair was different, the clothes were different. Most people would have dismissed the possibility. Tessa thought about it, trying to put into words something that had been more instinct than conscious reasoning. "It was her face," Tessa said slowly, and the way she wasn't acting like a normal kid. She was too still, too watchful, too scared. And the woman she was with, everything about her felt performed, like she was playing a role. "When I saw the Amber Alert photo, I recognized the eyes first and then the scar. But honestly, I think I knew something was wrong before I ever saw that alert. I just didn't know what it was until I had something to compare it to." Agent Torres nodded. "That's good instinct, Miss Cole. That's the kind of awareness that saves lives." By the time Emma's parents arrived, the sun was starting to sink toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Tessa was sitting at the counter, drinking her 4th cup of coffee, trying to process everything that had happened in the span of a single shift. Miguel had taken over her tables, and the manager had told her to take the rest of the day off with pay, but she couldn't bring herself to leave. She needed to see Emma reunited with her parents. She needed to know the story had a happy ending. When Jennifer and Michael Richards came through the door of the Waffle House, Tessa knew them immediately. Jennifer was a small woman with Emma's brown eyes and freckles, and her face was pale with exhaustion and streaked with tears. Michael was tall and broad-shouldered, his expression stunned with relief and lingering fear. They moved through the diner like people in a dream, and when they saw Emma sitting in that booth, they both started crying. Emma looked up, saw her parents, and screamed the kind of scream that was pure joy and pure release. "Mommy! Daddy!" She scrambled out of the booth and ran to them, and they dropped to their knees and caught her, wrapping her in their arms and holding her like they would never let go. The entire diner had gone silent. Every customer, every server, every cook in the back kitchen had stopped what they were doing to watch this reunion, and there wasn't a dry eye in the building. Tessa felt tears streaming down her face, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. Jennifer Richards was sobbing into Emma's hair, saying her name over and over like a prayer, while Michael held them both, his face buried in his daughter's shoulder, his shoulders shaking with the force of his relief. Emma clung to them, her purple rabbit squashed between their bodies, and she was crying too, but these were different tears. These were the tears of a child who'd been lost and was finally found, who'd been terrified and was finally safe. After several long minutes, Jennifer looked up, her face wet with tears, and her eyes found Tessa. She stood slowly, still holding Emma's hand, and walked over to where Tessa was sitting at the counter. "You're the server who recognized her," Jennifer said, her voice breaking. "The detective told us. She told us you saw the alert. You recognized Emma even though her hair was cut. You called the police, and you blocked the door so that woman couldn't take my baby away." Tessa nodded, not trusting her voice. Jennifer reached out and took both of Tessa's hands in hers, gripping them tightly. "You gave me back my daughter," she said, her voice thick with emotion. 4 days, she was gone for 4 days, and every second I thought I'd never see her again. I thought she was gone forever, and you brought her back to me." Tessa's throat was so tight she could barely breathe. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Jennifer said firmly, tears still streaming down her face. "Most people wouldn't have looked twice. Most people would have minded their own business. Most people would have talked themselves out of calling, convinced themselves they were wrong, afraid of causing trouble. But you didn't. You saw my daughter, you trusted your instincts, and you acted. You saved her life." Michael came over, carrying Emma, who had her arms wrapped around his neck. He extended his hand to Tessa, and when she took it, he held on with both hands. "Thank you," he said simply. "Thank you for seeing her. Thank you for caring. Thank you for not looking away." Tessa could only nod, overwhelmed by the weight of their gratitude and the magnitude of what had almost been lost. "Can I talk to her?" Emma asked quietly, looking at Tessa with those wide brown eyes that had first caught Tessa's attention. Michael set Emma down, and the little girl walked over to Tessa, still clutching her purple rabbit. She looked up at Tessa with a seriousness that seemed too old for a 6-year-old. "Thank you for seeing me," Emma said, her voice small but clear. "I tried to show people something was wrong, but nobody looked at me. I was scared nobody would ever see me. But you saw me." Tessa knelt down to Emma's level, her heart breaking and healing at the same time. "You were very brave, Emma. You stayed calm, you didn't give up, and when the police came, you told them your name. That took a lot of courage. The lady told me if I tried to tell anyone, she would hurt my mom and dad," Emma said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "She said if I was good and quiet, my family would be safe. So I tried to be invisible, but I wanted someone to see me. I was hoping so much that someone would see me." Tessa pulled Emma into a gentle hug, this small child who'd carried terror and hope in equal measure, who'd been brave beyond her years. "I saw you, sweetheart, and you're safe now." Over the following weeks, Tessa learned the full story. Diane Keswick had been obsessed with Emma for months, had convinced herself that Emma was meant to be her daughter, and had planned the abduction with chilling precision. She'd waited until the playground was crowded during recess, had called Emma over by saying her mother had been in an accident, and she'd been sent to pick her up, and had driven away with Emma before any teachers noticed she was gone. For 4 days, Emma had been held in a series of motels and rest stops, while Keswick dyed her hair, cut it short, changed her clothes, and moved steadily south toward Florida. Emma had tried to signal for help twice before the Waffle House, once at a gas station and once at a fast food restaurant. But both times the adults she'd tried to reach had either not noticed or not understood. Tessa's recognition and quick action had broken the case open. Keswick was charged with kidnapping, child endangerment, and multiple other felonies. The investigation revealed she'd been planning to take Emma out of the country, had false documents prepared, and had a network of contacts who would have helped her disappear. Without Tessa's intervention, Emma would have vanished permanently. The story made national news. Waffle House server saves abducted child by recognizing Amber Alert. Tessa was interviewed by local stations, then national outlets, and the attention was overwhelming and unwanted. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who'd simply done what needed to be done. But the Richards family didn't let her retreat into anonymity. They came back to the Waffle House 2 weeks after Emma's rescue, bringing a card that Emma had made herself. It showed a drawing of a woman with brown hair standing next to a little girl with short hair and a purple rabbit, and underneath, Emma had written in careful letters, "Thank you for seeing me. You are my hero." Jennifer and Michael had written a longer note inside, thanking Tessa again, telling her that Emma was in therapy and was doing remarkably well, that she talked about Tessa constantly, and that they would be forever grateful for her vigilance and courage. They asked if Emma could visit sometimes, if Tessa was comfortable with that, because Emma had said she wanted to see the lady who saved her, wanted to show her that she was okay, wanted to thank her in person. Tessa agreed, and over the following months the Richards family became regular visitors to the Waffle House on Tessa's shifts. Emma would sit at the counter and color while Tessa worked, would tell her about school and therapy and the things she was learning about staying safe. She still carried her purple rabbit everywhere, but now it was accompanied by a small stuffed waffle that Jennifer had bought as a gift, a reminder of the place where Emma had been found, where someone had finally seen her, where her nightmare had ended. 6 months after the rescue, Emma's therapist told Jennifer that Emma had said something remarkable in a session. She'd said that the worst part of being taken wasn't being scared, though she'd been terrified. It was feeling invisible, feeling like no one was looking at her, like no one cared enough to see that something was wrong. And the moment everything changed, the moment she started to believe she might be okay, was when she'd looked up and met Tessa's eyes in that Waffle House, and for the first time in 4 days, someone had really seen her. Tessa kept Emma's drawing taped to her locker at work, a reminder that paying attention mattered, that trusting your instincts when something felt wrong could mean the difference between a child going home or disappearing forever, That sometimes the most important thing you could do was simply see someone who was desperately trying to be seen. The Waffle House started training all their staff on recognizing signs of trafficking and abduction, using Tessa's story as a case study. Other restaurants and businesses followed suit. The local police department invited Tessa to speak at community events about awareness and intervention, about trusting your gut when something felt off. Tessa always ended these talks the same way. She would tell them about Emma's eyes, about that moment of desperate hope when a 6-year-old child looked at a stranger and silently begged to be noticed. She would tell them that most of us go through our days not really seeing the people around us, not paying attention to the small signals that something is wrong. And she would tell them that one person choosing to pay attention, one person trusting their instincts, one person willing to cause a scene or risk being wrong could save a life. Emma turned 7 a year after her rescue. The Richards family threw a party, and Tessa was invited as a guest of honor. Emma had grown taller, more confident, and her hair had grown back to shoulder length. She smiled more easily now, laughed more freely, and though her therapist said she still had hard days, she was healing. When Emma opened Tessa's gift, a new purple rabbit to keep her original one company, she hugged Tessa tight and whispered in her ear, "You saved my life. I'm never going to forget you." Tessa hugged her back, this brave little girl who'd survived something no child should ever experience, who'd stayed strong enough and hopeful enough to keep trying to signal for help even when it seemed like no one was watching. "I'm never going to forget you either," Tessa said. "You taught me that every person we pass in our day has a story, and sometimes that story needs someone to pay attention, to care enough to look twice, to act even when it's easier to look away." Because that was the truth. Predators counted on people being too busy, too distracted, too uncomfortable to notice or intervene. They counted on children being dismissed, on adults not wanting to cause a scene, on everyone minding their own business. And every person willing to break that pattern, to trust their instincts, to speak up when something felt wrong, became part of the solution that brought children home. Emma's story spread through social media, shared by parents and teachers and community groups, as a reminder to teach children that asking strangers for help in real emergencies was okay, that making eye contact and trying to signal for help could save their lives, that even when adults seemed not to notice, they should keep trying because eventually someone would see them. And it reminded adults that children in crisis were often trying desperately to communicate, that small signals mattered, that mismatched clothing or a fearful expression or unnatural stillness could mean something was terribly wrong, that taking 30 seconds to check an Amber Alert or make a phone call to authorities could be the difference between a family reunited and a family destroyed. Tessa never wanted recognition for what she'd done. She just wanted people to understand that awareness saves lives, that trusting your gut when something feels wrong is worth the risk of being mistaken, and that every child in danger is counting on adults to pay attention, to see them, to take them seriously. Years later, when Emma was in high school, she wrote an essay about her experience for a national contest on overcoming adversity. She wrote about being 6 years old and terrified, about feeling invisible, about the moment a server in a Waffle House had looked at her and truly seen her, about how that moment had changed everything. She wrote about learning that even when you feel most alone, someone might be watching, someone might notice, someone might care enough to act. She wrote about the importance of awareness, of community responsibility, of being the kind of person who doesn't look away when something feels wrong. And she ended her essay with a dedication to Tessa Cole, who taught me that being seen can save your life, and that sometimes heroes are just ordinary people who pay attention when everyone else is too busy to look. Tessa framed that essay and hung it beside Emma's childhood drawing in her home. 2 reminders that the smallest acts of awareness and courage could ripple out in ways you never imagined, that choosing to see someone who needed to be seen was one of the most important things a person could do, and that every child who signals for help deserves an adult willing to trust their instincts and act. Because Emma had been right. Sometimes all it takes is one person paying attention, one person willing to believe, one person who refuses to look away, and that one person can change everything.